The Cincinnati Bengals' approach to free agency is going to leave them with holes they cannot address in this draft. Which holes those will be? That's the question. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Liscow. He's your host, James Rapien, and we are Locked On Bengals on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Locked On Bengals covering the Cincinnati Bengals daily here on the Locked On Podcast Network since 2016. We're now on YouTube, so all the everydayers out there probably already know it. Shout out to you, and if you'd like to join that club and not miss an episode of Locked On Bengals, especially at this time of year, as we're leading into the NFL draft, you can just hit that subscribe button wherever you get your podcasts, and we appreciate all of you out there that make us your first listen. Today, we're going to spend some time talking about the needs heading into the draft, essentially, that the Bengals have left themselves after a free agency that did not sign enough starters and is requiring the Bengals to then find those players in the draft. And as we talked about yesterday, James, for so long, when we got to the running back topic, something will not get done in this draft. It's almost inevitable that that will be the case, and it's up to the Bengals then to mitigate whatever that incomplete part of the roster is as best they can, whether that's with veteran moves after the draft, with undrafted free agents, with development. We'll see. No NFL roster, of course, is perfect. And then we've got another top 30 visit to talk about another Tennessee defensive lineman that the Bengals are hosting for a pre-draft visit. But when you look at this depth chart, James, and we've talked about this, but with the draft imminent at this point, it is very obvious that, and our conversation yesterday, I think, revealed this as well, it will be nearly impossible to come out of this draft feeling like you've done everything you needed to do this offseason.
Yeah, they've put themselves in a position where they need a starting guard. They need a more pass rush. They need. There are a lot of needs. And like the absolute minimum is one starting guard. But if they landed two, I don't think anybody would be complaining, because that's where they're at. You could certainly argue that they don't have a starting guard on the roster. They may have a guard that's going to start on the roster. It's a very different thing. And that's where it starts. And so for those that heard the conversation yesterday at the end of the show, and it's like, oh, well, running back. Well, yeah, I mean, running back is a need. But to your point, there's like 1,000 needs. LB2 is a need. You want juice in the pass rush. You want to potentially add a tight end at some point. But like tight end and running back and linebacker aren't considered super high positions of value, but you need a starting linebacker. And where do they find that? Like that's what's tough here is, I think if you would have taken a poll a month ago, let's go a month ago, because that's before the legal negotiating window started, we would have thought that they would have had a starting guard that they had signed and probably a Jermaine Pratt replacement, that they would have signed someone that could come in and do that, or have something resolved with Jermaine Pratt where he's either cut or there's another pick involved because you're able to trade him, but you put that money to good use. And instead, his cap hit remains. You haven't traded him. Maybe they do. And you haven't signed a starting guard. You haven't cut Geno Stone and gone after a safety that could be the guy in that room. And instead you're rolling with Geno Stone and hoping that he's better if you can't get a safety early. Because there's a scenario, like you look at all the mocks and it's like, all right, well, there's going to be a guard here and then a safety here and then a defensive line here. Well, what if the draft just doesn't fall that way and you don't get a safety? And it's really us talking about like 5 guys that could come in, maybe 6, that could come in and potentially take Geno's job. That's just a tough place to be in. And it's okay if it's just safety and we're talking about that, or it's just defensive line, or it's just guard. Like you can get by with a big need. But it's those plus linebacker plus all of the other things that you would really like. And in this class, I would really like to address running back, and I think they would too. By the way, if they didn't want to this year, then they should have taken one of the 10 picks last year and done it. It's just there's so many things. And with 6 picks, it's why everyone has said only 6 picks. 6 picks isn't much different than normal.
No.
But when you had 10 picks last year and you look around and there's all these weaknesses, it feels like you need a bunch more picks. And I'm just not sure they're going to be able to trade down, even though they're going to want to.
And even if you do, there's a drawback to trading down. You are giving up value with the premium pick that you're moving back for. And maybe that doesn't change the player you're targeting. NFL teams are targeting a specific player when they trade back, or players, maybe a player or two. And when they trade back, they probably don't feel like they're stepping down a tier and they're adding shots in the draft, which is great. But it doesn't always work out, obviously. Plenty of examples of this throughout NFL history. James, a while ago, I was talking to Joe Goodberry, and we tried to rank the severity of needs when we were looking at the Bengals roster. We came up with a 1 to 10 system where 10 essentially is you can't line up at all. Like the players you have on the team right now, you cannot line up and run a snap. You don't feel like you can do that with the personnel on the roster.
Okay.
Down to if we added a player at this position, a 1, it wouldn't really make an impact on the roster because we're so set there. In the middle, 5 is like there's an upgrade opportunity.
Yep.
And if you need other number specifics, we can get into them. Not going to run through them all now. But we're going through the positions that the Bengals need, and we landed on guard as a 10. We don't feel like we can line up with the guards on the roster today. We don't feel like there's a starting level guard on the roster. At 9, second highest priority, we ended up at defensive end. And this was at a time when maybe Trey was in a little bit more flux. Maybe this is 8, where there's a pressing need there instead of a barely line up. But there's definitely still a need at edge, especially with Trey Hendrickson's future in doubt. We ended up at 8 for defensive tackle, where there is a severe need for someone to step up, whether that's one of last year's picks or somebody they draft this year to be an impact interior defender, where they have solid depth there and a solid rotation there, but they're missing that top level player, that difference maker. Safety, 7, significant upgrade opportunity. Tight end was a 6, but we kind of thought this is a luxury area where they may not be able to address it. It might not actually make a huge difference. We've seen them survive with the kind of tight end room and thrive on offense that they have now. And linebacker ends up at a 6, where it's less pressing, but it's still a need. Maybe that one should be elevated. Do any of those stand out as very off base to you?
What's the plan with Jermaine Pratt?
Yeah.
That's like the weird elephant in the room right now. Like if you're talking about a linebacker room where they're just going to keep Jermaine now, and much like Trey, right, where they certainly feel like they're going to keep Trey, and it's just a matter of what gets done, what doesn't get done. Maybe they trade him, but I don't think that's going to happen. But if it's a linebacker room of Logan Wilson, Jermaine Pratt, Oren Burks, and then you fill it out with special teamers, well, that's fine. I think we've all kind of resigned ourselves to he's not going to be on the roster, which creates that urgency, which theoretically would have meant go get a starting linebacker in free agency. I mean, that's what I would have done. I also get wanting to get cheaper behind Logan Wilson since you're already paying 1. You don't want to pay spend money if you're building your team with a bunch of guys at linebacker. So I get that. But that's kind of the elephant in the room there. I will say there's one thing that you said that I'm not sure aligns with, not that I disagree, that aligns with the Bengals line of thinking. And that doesn't mean that they're not going to address the position, but I think it's going to be kind of controversial. So we'll get to my thoughts and me trying to get into the Bengals mindset here with the draft less than, 15 days away, almost 2 weeks away, Jake. We'll do that coming up next. Today's show is brought to you by Gametime. Gametime is the app you need right now to get tickets to all of your favorite events. And maybe that's a Reds game with the Reds and baseball season back. The NBA playoffs are right around the corner. Or maybe you're thinking long-term and looking at the Bengals, and maybe it's the 2025 regular season. Maybe you're thinking preseason with all the snaps that Joe Burrow and the starters may take this year. regardless of summer concerts or whatever you're looking for, Gametime is the app that you need to download right now. And when you download the Gametime app, you're going to get $20 off your first purchase. And the thing I love about Gametime is it's going to show you with their all-in pricing exactly what you're looking at from a price standpoint. There's not going to be a bunch of hidden fees when you go to checkout. You toggle that on switch for their all-in pricing, and boom, you know exactly what you're going to get. So whether it's a summer concert, whether it's the Cincinnati Bengals, whether it's the NBA playoffs, or any and everything in between, make sure that you download the Gametime app today. Use code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, download the Gametime app and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $20 off your first purchase with Gametime.
What is this position, James, that we are over prioritizing in your mind compared to where you think the Bengals are?
I wonder if they view defensive tackle as much of a, not that they're not. I mean, we're going to talk about Omar Norman Mott in a second. I just wonder if they're like, yeah, we're going to add maybe one to that room, but it's not nearly as pressing after we got TJ Slayton, and we're going to have BJ Hill, and we're going to have these two guys that we believe in McKinley Jackson and Chris Jenkins Jr. Like, maybe it's a 7 or a 6 for them. That's all. I think a lot of people would have it at an 8. I think there's a lot of our listeners and viewers that would have it at a 9. And I just wonder if the Bengals are a little lower on that. Obviously, there's a strength of the class, especially on, well, depends on how you view it, but the first few rounds of this class, I would say. And so will they get one? I think there's a good chance, but I'm not sure that they view it as pressing as just consensus, not just you and Joe, but just consensus views that position.
Yeah, it's an awkward situation that we talked about when they signed TJ Slayton and brought back BJ Hill, where there are 4 guys on the roster right now, a defensive tackle, which is both not very many. There's no like practice squad kind of guys on the roster defensive tackle right now. There's no future contract kind of guys on the roster defensive tackle right now. It's just those 4 guys. But also that's a lot because those guys are all going to be on your roster. Slayton will be your nose tackle. BJ Hill is obviously locked up on a 3-year deal. And Chris Jenkins and McKinley Jackson are second-year players. Those guys are all going to be on the team. They're all going to play. They're all right now slated to be active on game day. So if you have 4 active DTs for week 1, how pressing is that need on the one hand? On the other hand, you do not have enough bodies there to get through camp right now. You do not have enough bodies if there's an injury, and you do not have that high ceiling player, that difference maker that you have an opportunity to try to add this year, whether that's a specialist, which I would view Omar Norman Lott as more of a specialist type in that role, or a potential 3-down player like a Derek Harmon or a Walter Nolan. Or I have no idea how they view it. Maybe they think Kenneth Grant can develop into a Dexter Lawrence-esque pass rusher. Maybe he doesn't get to that kind of lofty comparison, but he can make that kind of difference where he can play up to that athleticism and add to his pass rushing game. And so they do go to a nose tackle like that. Or maybe it is even Tyleik Williams or any of the number of options beyond those top guys. There's a clear opportunity here to get better, right? And I think they're aware of that too. I mean, look at the guys they've had pre-draft contact with, Nolan most notably among those that we talked about earlier this week. But not only that, there's a severe need for depth. And maybe that ends up being a day 3 pick and some undrafted free agents to get through camp and some street free agents to get through camp. Maybe that's where they end up there, because right now they only have 4 guys. So they're certainly adding someone. It's just a question of how much they prioritize it, to your point, after they do feel like they've probably invested a fair amount of resources there between last year's draft picks and this year to free agents with BJ Hill's return and TJ Slayton.
That's what was tough. That's what was tough about the addition of not Slayton. You needed a nose tackle, goes without saying, but you keep BJ Hill and he's going to be here this year and next year. Like, look at that deal. We talked about it. Certainly off camera. I'm not sure if we did it during the pod, but it's not that they won't add, because I do think the odds are good. It might be the first round, by the way, but there's also a scenario where they look at it and it's like, all right, well, if you miss out on certain guys, and I think that's why they're doing all their day 2 homework too, is it very well could be that range where they take one at 49 or 81. And does that guy, by the way, push for playing time right away if Chris Jenkins levels up and McKinley Jackson is working his tail off and those guys are ready to go? Like there's just a lot to it. I think that's what's wild to me is you could argue defensive tackle is a huge need. Edge is a huge need. Linebacker is a really, like if Jermaine Pratt isn't here, it's a huge need. And then guard's the biggest need of them all. But like tight end, running back, like those are things they could use. Like we saw what Eric All brought. And by the way, I've seen a bunch of comments. Eric All is out for the 2025 season. I'm sure if you listen to us every day, you know that. But I've seen people on social media that haven't gotten that. So just in case you haven't known, Eric All is out for the 2025 season. His football future is certainly in doubt, which really sucks after that knee injury. But it would be nice to be able to take a tight end at some point. I think it would be nice to take a tight end at 17, and they're not in a position to do it. You said it earlier this week. Can you imagine how defenses would have to prepare if the Bengals are like, man, Colston Loveland is just going to be everything Eric All was and then some. If he's going to be Sam Laporta with even more juice in the passing game because of the way his ability to run routes, like that's not crazy of a projection if they feel that way. I don't know if they do, but I think if they took Colston Loveland, people would want to riot because of the lack of additions in key spots. And that's what's so tough here is in a draft that, especially at the middle part of the first round, feels like you're probably taking a second rounder in a lot of ways. You're going to view it, and unless someone falls, you're almost forced to take a need as well, in a big need, not it'd be nice to have this, or we could go. They almost have to go defensive tackle, defensive end, or guard. And that doesn't feel great to me. I hate that. And not that won't be the best player available. Maybe it is. But you want to go into the draft feeling like, whatever we take, whoever we add, we're going to get that a top player and add him to our roster. And it just doesn't feel like they're in position to blanket statement that because of the needs they have.
It's one of those jokes that we've had that's not really a joke. That is, the Bengals are going to leave themselves with one glaring need going into the draft. And it's more than one this year. In past years, it's been there. Well, I mean, last year it was very obvious they were going to take a tackle in the first round if they could. Yep. And they did. Yep. And this year, while that's maybe not as obvious, there are a few different directions they can go because the depth of the draft is a little bit different. Last year, there were 6 first-round tackles, and there's a clear need there for the Bengals. They have a need at guard, starting linebacker. They need an edge rusher of the future either way. They need this defensive tackle playmaker we've talked about. They want to challenge Geno Stone at free safety. You're at 5 already.
Yep.
So you're only getting maybe 3 guys that you could reasonably expect to step in and play meaningful snaps for you right away, and other guys who might need some development on day 3. That doesn't even mention potential to upgrade at corner, potential to upgrade at running back that we talked about yesterday.
Yep.
And in a draft where there are some players that could help you, wide receiver in day 3, you can't even really consider it, where there is still a need for depth there or an opportunity to improve your depth at wide receiver, especially in a world where you don't have Eric All. Mm-hmm. And maybe you could get a guy in the Cooper Kupp or Puka Nacua mold who can give you some of that big slot blocking that you need, but they play receiver instead of tight end. And so there's some things that you can hardly even consider because you know that there's certain things that it feels like the Bengals will either 100% need to force or feel very likely inclined to force because of their goals for their roster.
And so what they need to do, since we're talking about needs, they need, and they better be open, because regardless of what they do in the draft, they're going to be there's going to be a hole they need to fill. And maybe it's running back, maybe it's linebacker, maybe it's insert whatever you're thinking. Be open. If the edge rusher doesn't fall to you, well, then on May 3rd, you should be calling Zadarius Smith. if the running back doesn't work out, well, then J.K. Dobbins should be here. If the safety doesn't work out, well, Justin Simmons wants to be a Bengal, according to the Kay Adams show when he was talking about Cincinnati and all these other contenders that he would love to join to beat the Chiefs. Like, okay. Like, and it doesn't have to be Simmons. It could be someone else. It doesn't have to be any of the guys I just named. Obviously, everyone's going to mention Brandon Scherf, but you better be aggressive and add, and I would want them to do it now, of course. But you better do it after the draft, because if we're going into camp and it's like, oh, well, there's 2 to 3 holes like there was last year where defensive tackle, they just had no nose tackle. What a joke to not do that. The questions at guard last year, we knew there were going to be depth issues at guard. And guess what? It happened. That cannot be where they're at. And they've put themselves in that position. And so as long as they add after the draft, they can make up for it, but they better do that. And we'll see if they do.
I have one more thought on that before we turn our attention to Omar Norman Lott and the linebacker move the Bengals did make. It's a minor move. It's a depth move. We'll finish the show with those topics coming up next. James, my thought as I look at the remaining free agents out there is that there are a lot of options at a lot of those positions we're talking about. But unless you feel really good about CJ Mosley at 33 years old, or Eric Kendricks at 33 years old, or I don't know, Devondre Campbell at 33, David Long coming off a year where he couldn't stick to a team, there aren't great linebacker options out there.
Mm-hmm.
And if they do plan to move on from Jermaine Pratt, which perhaps is now more in the air than we thought it was, maybe not. Maybe there's a firm plan in place there. Maybe they're just going to draft a linebacker and have a very clear plan to do so. That's one position where the veteran options are not as, let's say, promising. Like if they need a guard, there's still all the guards we've been talking about for a month. If they need a corner, there's still some corners out there that can play. If they need a safety, there's a number of safeties. Simmons, you mentioned, Julian Blackmon. I mean, all these guys we've been talking about, most of them are still out there. Outside of Calais Campbell, who signed with his former team in the Southwest in Arizona to play in some warm weather, presumably. Linebacker feels like one where if they get out of the draft without one, I don't love their options. I mean, do you think that they would go for CJ Mosley for 1 year? That breaks their MO in so many ways. 33-year-old, 1 year deal kind of thing, like not in
Get
their
over yourself.
DNA.
Get over yourselves. That's what I would say. You're trying to win now.
Yeah, of course, but
you're trying to win now. Like I hate this. I hate they're old. And honestly, I wonder how much of it is that and how much of it is the money thing. Where it's like, oh well, no, we're planning on going with Young there and it's just like, okay, but if Mosley can be good right now, then you feel all right about it. I like that's where I land. And it is a good point on linebacker because I don't think they'll sign an old linebacker. I think that also kind of aligns with how they may view linebacker in this draft. Instead of a 6, that might be an 8 for them. In defensive tackle might be a 6. It might flip. And they may be saying, hey, we better leave this draft with the starting linebacker because we're cutting Jermaine Pratt. I'll keep mentioning it. Andy Dalton was on the roster until after they drafted Joe Burrow, when the whole world, including Joe Burrow, knew he was being drafted by the Bengals. And they kept him around just in case, I think, from a trade standpoint, knew he didn't have trade value and cut him. Might be the same thing with Pratt. I don't think Pratt has trade value. And so that might be like, they may say, we're not leaving day 2 without a linebacker. If you need a starting linebacker, that's probably the way to go. Everyone's going to mention Jack Kaiser. Maybe they think that he can step in right away and just be a starter. I think there's a lot of hope there. If that's your plan, maybe that's not the plan. Maybe you're going to roll with Kaiser and then say, hey, you know what? He's going to develop behind Logan Wilson and behind Oren Burks. And that's kind of the route you go. I don't know. I think that would still be kind of wishful thinking. But then how do you use that Pratt money anyway? Mm-hmm. And that's the other element of this. Not just cutting Jermaine Pratt to cut Jermaine Pratt. I would cut Jermaine Pratt to use that $6 million to go get Brandon Scherf and insert whoever, or Scherf only if you're going 1 year, $6 million or whatever it is.
You only have to go back to 2020. The Bengals signed Josh Bynes, age 31 season,
Yeah.
1-year deal to play linebacker. So
Yeah.
they have done it not too long ago.
That
So
was
maybe it's on the cards.
hey, if they could find the next Josh Bynes, that'd be great.
Looking at the linebackers they've had contact with as we transition to the Omar Norman Lott topic, as they're having him in for a 30 visit, you assume Jack Kaiser. That's a day 3 guy. Barrett Carter, probably an early day 3 guy. And Nick Martin, a day 3 guy. So they've had contact with a couple of linebackers, if you include Jack Kaiser especially. And of course, they had a presence at Ohio State's Pro Day where maybe they talked to Cody Simon as well. Those are all day 3 guys. And for day 2 guys, there's not a whole lot. Most of the linebackers in this class are going to be drafted on day 3.
Do you think that that's a strategy where Burks and Wilson would start, and then they would draft one of those guys? Like I'd be okay with that. I'm not mad at it. I also want to use that Pratt money. I don't want it to sit there and it roll over.
And like you said, it could go to a different position. It could be as simple
I'm
as that.
fine
Like
with that.
they decide they need one of these other positions that they don't get in the draft. Maybe they don't get the running back, right? And they want to go maybe sign J.K. I don't know. Maybe that's outlandish. Probably is a little bit for them, but
it is. Yeah. That's the other thing. I want to be cheap at running back anyways, but yeah, that's going back to yesterday. Let's not let that derail things. Omar Norman Lott.
Hold on. Running back. Let's talk about it for 10 more minutes. No, Omar Norman Lott. Go ahead.
Thank God. I was like, do we have to that was really good. Check out the end of our show yesterday, by the way. It was a really good back and forth that we didn't plan. And sometimes those things are, those are the best. So if you didn't last until like minute 27 of yesterday's show, go back and do that, because it was like a 37-minute show. It was all because of running back. That would have been a good lead to a show one day. And instead we buried it. Spur of the moment. Let's get to Omar Norman Lott. He's going to bring, you want some interior juice on day 2, in the 3rd round. You pick him at 81. I would be open to it. The Bengals certainly doing their due diligence at defensive tackle.
Omar Norman Lott is a 3rd to 4th round grade, according to the Beast, and it is Beastmas as we're recording this episode. Love having that reference from Dane Brugler, and it is like 523 pages this year, according to what I'm looking at right now. But Norman Lott is a player who did not get on the field a ton in Tennessee. Obviously, a teammate to James Pierce, so a couple of Tennessee defensive linemen coming in. Consensus 73 currently on the boards we're tracking. He'll be 23 years old when the draft rolls around. Just 291 pounds at the combine for Norman Lott, which is obviously a little bit on the lighter side for defensive tackles, where you're really looking for someone to be closer to that 300-pound number to be an every down player. Doesn't mean he can't add the weight, but at 23, he's closer to a finished product physically than a guy like Walter Nolan, who's a little bit younger. But what you get with Norman Lott, like you said, is a guy who had a lot of success rushing the passer in college. And the pass rush win rate, the pressure rates, these numbers all very strong for Norman Lott. And that also applies to true pass sets. Like he would be your Larry Ogunjobi style of player. Maybe not the same size, but that style of player. And if that's a guy that, according to Dane, is a 3rd to 4th round bubble guy, maybe that's still in the top 100 this year, because there's only 13 first-round players, pure first-round players in this draft. Maybe that makes it hard to get him in day 3, but a guy that they should be considering to fill that role. And Dane, interesting, has him listed at 303, a little bit bigger than we had him at the combine.
Would be open to it. Would certainly be open to it. And that's the beauty, I think, of this draft, is like, there are going to be edges. If they don't get an edge in round 1, let's say they go safety round 1, or Jahad Campbell, even though I think that there's some questions there, but you go non-edge, non-defensive tackle. There's guys on day 2 and maybe into day 3. And usually there is. Like, we talk about this and it's like, oh, well, that guy's going to be off the board. You either take him at 81 or maybe he's there at 119. Maybe one of these guys is. Odds are they will be. And someone is, if there's that many and there's that much depth there, or guys that the Bengals like. And I think that's going to be what's interesting here. Like, Omar Norman Lott, are they thinking of him as pick 81? Because they had James Pierce Jr. in. Are they thinking of him as pick 17? Or are they looking at him as pick 49? Like I genuinely wonder where they have these guys slotted, because that makes a big difference. And I think that there's going to be a defensive lineman, I would say, in round 3 that you don't expect to be there, and probably in round 4 that you don't expect to be there. Have the Bengals already addressed it by then? Maybe, and that's great if they have. But Norman Lott's certainly a name to know. Real quick, would you be in on Isaiah Simmons as a free agent linebacker?
Not to be a starter that you're relying on, like as a guy to see if you can get anything out of him. All right, like a camp invite kind of thing.
Yeah, I think you'd have Burks in as the starter. I think you would instantly say that, as Burks would start with Logan, and then you bring in like Isaiah Simmons and a Jack Kaiser or something. I don't know. At some point they'll take a linebacker, I would imagine.
You're probably thinking about Shaka Hayward beating those guys out, in my mind, or John Meta being that third guy on base downs when you're going to have 3 linebackers on the field.
That's Simmons. All right.
I think Simmons has some work to do still.
I'm not. He's like best friends with T. So I was just kind of curious. I was like, I
mean, it'd be great to take that ball of athletic clay and turn it into a great NFL player, but it hasn't happened so far for him.
No doubt.
And I think that's tough. The one other note here before we get to the player the Bengals signed in the linebacker room on Wednesday, Ty Hamilton, who we mentioned a couple days ago, Ohio State defensive tackle, who the Bengals had in for a pre-draft visit that we believe was a local visit, not counting against their 30 visits, is number 92 on Dane Brugler's board, which is fascinating to me. Well ahead of Omar Norman Lott. He has a solid 3rd round grade on Ty Hamilton. And Ty Robinson, Nebraska defensive tackle, who you can get in like the 6th round of pretty much every simulator, right behind Ty Hamilton on the defensive tackle list. So some interesting challenging of some of those mock draft machine norms that you've seen is how I would say my preliminary skim of the beast looks. But last thing here, James.
Real quick, Ty Hamilton has a Levi Onwuzurike comparison on NFL.com, according to Lance Zierlein, and will eventually be an average starter. So certainly someone that you would say day 2 as well. So interesting.
2 early 3. Dane isn't the authority on these things. The NFL draft is an unpredictable place, but just always fun to see Dane's work because he's more plugged in than just about anybody out there, and he's been doing it at a high level for a long time. Last note, the Bengals signed a free agent linebacker, Joe Giles-Harris. This is almost certainly a depth move, almost certainly a special team kind of move. He has not played a whole lot throughout his NFL career where he's bounced around teams. Go ahead. What do you got?
Linebacker is solved now, Jake.
Oh,
what are you talking about?
We buried it until the 33-minute mark.
The
Bengals signed a linebacker. They don't need a linebacker anymore.
Jack Kaiser Schmeiser. You don't need him. Jihad who? Never heard of Mr. Campbell. You don't need him now. What's
Giles Harris?
Giles Harris
was on the Bengals practice squad for 1 game last season as well, and returns to fill out that room, and he'll compete in camp for a spot with Darren Simmons, most likely.
Or in Burks with the tackle, and it's a fumble. Giles Harris picks it up and could go all the way. All right, there's my Dan Horde impression.
That's going to do it for this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Until next time, thanks for listening. Hoo day, and have a good one.